Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sally Fletcher, Head of SSON Digital, and I'm delighted to be hosting this session today. So I host a lot of webinars, and I must say this is one I'm really excited to be hosting because it's on such an exciting topic, and one I know you guys, our shared services members, can really benefit on because it's on resource management. So when I look at resource management within global business services, agility and productivity are paramount. So as new skills emerge and old ones become irrelevant, businesses need to assess their current capabilities against future needs. They need to understand A, how to fully utilize the employees they currently have, B, how to upskill their staff for future of business, and C, how to maximize retention, which is always one of the biggest challenges we get when we have that state of the industry survey you guys participate in. So on that front, in our most recent results, we found that upskilling shared services and GBS staff was the #1 objective for hundreds of respondents. And that was even above leveraging automation or rethinking operating models, which I know are the fundamentals of shared services. So this is a topic we've been talking about for a long time, but there are some new approaches to the problem of talent, which is why SSON was so delighted to partner with Eightfold AI to discuss how you can apply a skills-first approach to resource management and how AI and analytics can help you on that journey. So before I introduce our speaker, I just wanted to kind of update you on the console that you've got there in front of you so you can make maximum use of the next half an hour, 40 minutes. So on the left-hand side, you've got the attendee chat. Me and Connor are both here live, so please do put your questions in there. You can also message me or Kerry in there, my colleague, if you have any technical difficulties, and we'll get right back to you. On the right-hand side, we've got our resource center. So our resource center has additional resources related to the presentation topic, and there's some really fantastic stuff in there. So make sure you click on that and download the information within there. There's also a head and shoulders icon at the bottom, and that has more information about our speaker here, Connor. You can click on that to read more about who he is and what he does and connect with him on LinkedIn. So, Connor, welcome to today's webinar.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Sally.
So as I said, Connor Volpe is the Director of Product Marketing for Eightfold AI, and he's going to be joined with us today. Before we kind of kickstart with our first question, we're going to put you guys to work. So I want to know from you, what is the primary challenge or pain point when it comes to resource management? Is it A, allocating resources efficiently, B, tracking resource utilization, C, balancing workloads among team members, D, forecasting future resource needs, E, dealing with unexpected resource constraints, or if there's something else that I haven't put there, then please do put it into the attendee chat. I would love to see kind of what challenges you're facing, then that can help us better steer the conversation towards helping you. So I'm going to leave that up there for a minute. And Connor, I usually do ask our speakers to give us kind of a quick song, maybe a Christmas carol while we wait for the answers. But, you know, I might let you off for good behavior this time. But, you know,
nobody wants to hear that.
If you want.
Yeah, nobody wants to hear that from me, especially if you're on the West Coast in the States like I am. It is way too early for someone who has absolutely zero singing talent to throw out a Christmas carol. So why don't we'll spare everybody from that, and maybe I can practice or something, or get a buddy in here to help me sing next time. For now, we can let it go.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. So I'll leave that up there for a minute, and I'd love, you know, just to kickstart our conversation. So I want you to tell us in brief why you feel organizations need to shift their people management from a jobs-focused approach to a skills-first approach, and what does that mean in practice?
The in brief part might be difficult, but I'll give it my best shot. So I think that there are two different altitudes we can kind of answer this question at. And the first of which is any company in any industry, why we think it's really important to move over towards a skills focused approach. And then I'll answer it for the professional services industry as well. And I think where this starts is historically we've put so much importance on the job. The job has ended up being the be all end all. Now, whether that's for hiring practices, for going out and finding someone new to add to the team, or whether it's for succession planning, it was for a specific job, internal mobility, talent marketplaces. It's all about the job. So when we do that, we think about filling a job or a position, we have to start by defining it. And when we define a job, we think about, well, who's the hiring manager? What are the job requirements? What does the job description look like? Which geo is it in? What does compensation look like? And I think skills are a part of that too at this point, which is good. We should call that out. But the next step in that equation is, how do I take this job and bring it to as many people as possible? Because the idea is, well, if I have a large pipeline of talent, if I have a huge funnel of people, ultimately then I can try to find the right match for my company, and it gives me more tries to do that. So we end up taking a job first approach and applying it to talent. And I think with a skills focused approach, you actually kind of move this entirely opposite. So you have to understand people first, talent, because how you would define a person, Sally, you or I, in the context of HR or hiring or even staffing, is to understand skills. What can I do? What am I capable of today? And what am I capable of tomorrow? So we understand a person by their skills. And then rather than applying one job to many people, instead, let's take talent or a person and apply their skills to as many opportunities as possible. That very well could be a job. It could also be a project. It could be courses. It could be tasks. It could be fractional work. It could be a mentorship program. Where are the skills best utilized for the organization and for the person? How can we help them grow and change? So when we think about a skills first approach, it allows us to be more talent centric and people centric and find the best place for a person to be in that organization and kind of track. One of the other ways I think it's helpful to think about this is each job kind of more or less has a before or after. If you've ever done workforce planning, technically, you have jobs at grade 3, grade 4, grade 5, whatever that looks like. So you end up following a very linear path. And sometimes you can jump around, you can jump into a different track, what have you. But if we start to think about how skills might impact that, and if I'm being evaluated and ultimately utilized for my skills, I can go any which direction. It's not necessarily jumping to the next promotion, which would be great, but it might be an opportunity over here, a project over there, tasks, fractional work, all those kinds of things allow me, the company, to leverage my skills as more of a portfolio instead of just one person, and ultimately me to be used where I am going to be most effective. So that's the answer for any organization in any industry. We think skills unlocks a greater degree of mobility and satisfaction for the employee. Now, when it comes to professional services, what we advocate for is thinking about skills as inventory. And that statement by itself might not be revolutionary for many of you on the line, but instead of thinking about how many people hours do we have, we found it's very helpful to think about, well, how many hours of a particular skill do we have? So that we can then map those skills to client requests or client needs or projects. So oftentimes, I'm sure many of you are getting requests from clients on, yes, maybe they ask for a position, they're looking for a data scientist, for example, but then in that same breath, they're also saying, well, I need help with tax law in a particular locale or country or state. So that is a skill versus a role. And as we think about applying our inventory towards client needs, we can be more dynamic, and we can better understand too, if we have an understanding of all the skills in our organization, how much they're getting utilized, how much or little rather, we can see, well, if we have a surplus of a particular skill, maybe that means we can sell more projects that utilize that skill. Or maybe that means we can staff more people with that skill onto existing projects so they move more quickly. Or maybe if we've had a surplus in this skill for the past 6 months, that means that these skills need to be moved over to a place where they're more valuable. So it allows organizations to have a more strategic lens into buying and borrowing those skills. Do I need to cultivate them from within? Do I need to go acquire them in the market? Do I need to go bring in a contractor to help us with this in the short term? But it allows for that build, buy, borrow approach to be more strategic and ultimately, again, thinking about these skills as inventory. Now, on the client side, they can be more specific with the skills that they're looking for, the needs they have of a company. So they can be more particular. They can get more of what they want out of the inventory that a company has to offer. And ultimately, if they're getting the right skills for the right job, then projects should be completed more efficiently and effectively. And on the firm side, if the firm has more of an idea of what the skills they have internally, placing those skills into the most profitable place possible ultimately benefits the firm. And Sally, you mentioned it, but retention is such a key one. I know we're going to touch on it, I'm sure, a few times today. But if I'm being staffed based on what I know rather than who I know, right? I have an understanding that how I get on a particular project is based on my skills or even my potential to learn new ones. Um, it gives me some more agency or transparency into the staffing process, more faith that I'm going to be used not only where I'm most beneficial to the company or the firm, but where I can make the greatest impact and ultimately provide the most value. So I said I was going to be, it was going to be tough to be brief, but it's a big question. There's a lot to say about how we ultimately use skills in any industry.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting concept because we have been talking about the talent gap or the job
Mm, of
shortage, talent shortage in shared services since I've been working at SSON, which is 11 years. And
course.
no one's really come up with a solution. And that this is a really innovative concept. I certainly think so, because it allows you to not necessarily just template people
Mm,
into you fit into this job, you fit into this job. But, people are so wondrous in their variety. And this is really allowing us to look at not putting people into a template, but allowing them to flourish based on their skills and seeing that. So I think it's such a cool concept to explore. Um, Before we kind of go on to our next question, let's have a look at our results and
let's
see
do
if
it.
there's any surprises in there. Um, Guys, that's very boring. It's really evenly split. I was hoping for something wild, but no. So forecasting future resource needs, yeah, I can totally believe that. 37.5% is our highest challenge. And then we see allocating resources efficiently. Does that kind of sit with what you see from your clients, Connor?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it goes back to thinking about skills as inventories. Like, well, how do we know, or how do we have faith or make sure that we are putting people where they're ultimately going to be of most use to, again, the firm, but also to the client? So this also comes to how do we get fewer and fewer people on the bench and onto projects?
Yeah.
Skills can help with a variety of different things like that. But as you mentioned, it's being less templatized and more specific about what ultimately goes into the work, which in many times, in many cases, is skills. So I'm going to be probably a broken record on that today, but since that's in the title of the webinar, I think that's okay. But yeah, I think it very much
They
so
know
can
what they
help with
signed up for,
allocating
don't worry.
resources. Yeah, yeah.
Let's have a look at, oh, there we go. That's the right question. That's the right slide. Let's have kind of move on to our next point of discussion. So I mentioned SSON, we do a state of the industry survey for every year, and we've just done the one for 2024, which probably a lot of people on the call did the survey and contributed it. So we found that the top skills that shared service are prioritizing now are no longer things like accounting, but instead they're problem solving, process design, and data management. How can you go about finding people with skills such as this?
Yeah, so this slide is some research that Deloitte has done as of late, and they're basically kind of underscoring my not so brief answer to the previous question, which is that companies who do lean into skills, they see some pretty great benefits. We were talking about briefly, we talked about retention, and again, if I whether I'm in a professional services organization or any company, if I feel like I am getting placed or used as most closely aligns to what I'm actually good at, I'm probably more likely to stay. It increases my morale. It makes me feel more useful. And then ultimately, as we were talking, I mean, being able to place talent more effectively by the skill in a place where the organization and the client are more comfortable or understand that this is the right person for this project, fantastic. And then being more innovative, more likely to have a reputation as a great place to work, all that kind of comes back to using a skill lens is very helpful. But I think, Sally, as you were mentioning, there's specific skills that are hard to come by. And actually, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, I think there's a little visual we've done or some research that we've done that really helps folks out there. So this is true of any industry. So this is something we've done for oil and gas. And to brief people just to touch on why we're able to do this kind of work at Eightfold, we base our AI on one of the world's largest stores of talent data. So we have over 1.5 billion data points of skills, career trajectories, profiles, which means we've seen a pretty darn good portion of all the working adults in the world, and therefore we can make some market-driven insights such as this that we help our clients with, and also allows us to do some pretty cool research. But I bring this up to say that I'm sure there are very specific skills that people that you all in professional services are looking to acquire. and they're very competitive, right? You could change your sourcing tactics, you could change your compensation tactics, you could change whatever that looks like to try to acquire more of these skills. What we try to help our customers with is, yes, by all means, we will help you do that. We'll help you go out and get exactly the skill you need. But while we're doing that, we can also widen the aperture for you by looking at skill potential. So if we think about each skill and how it relates to other ones around it, it's extremely rare to find one that is way off in a silo that has nothing to do with any other skill. There's usually, if you want to think about it, like a step ladder almost to a particular skill, or other relations, or kind of at a crossroads, so to speak. So when we think about skill potential, that's what we're essentially showing here for oil and gas. So those skills on the left-hand side in blue, well testing, machine learning, biofuels, carbon capture, wind power, these are things that companies in oil and gas are trying to acquire more of these skills or build them. But the issue is, if we kind of skip the adjacent skills piece, and we look at well testing on the right, there's only about 30,000 people in the world who have that well testing skill. So yes, you can go out and compete like mad for those 30,000 people, and we fully support any company who wants to do that. But where we try to help is we say, well, let's actually move back towards the left. Let's move back towards those adjacent skills. If there are candidates out there who know drilling and well completion, formation evaluation, well intervention, there's a pretty good chance that they're going to be really good at well testing if we provide them a little bit of help, or they have the potential to learn this based on the skills they have today. So by doing that, we all of a sudden, we just 6.5 times our well testing population that we can go out and look for. Or if you look even further down, obviously for a lot of oil and gas companies looking to get into renewables or green energy, and the wind power one to me is the most powerful because it makes a lot of sense to someone who's maybe a little bit of a dummy when it comes to oil and gas. But if someone knows power generation, electrical engineering, energy transmission, and mechanical engineering, we could teach them about wind power, or they could learn that style of how to use power generation, electrical engineering. So we go from, again, 25,000-ish or so people to 1.5 million. So to bring this all the way back, I think, Sally, to your question about if there are specific skills people are looking for, there are many ways, that different levers to pull to try to find those skills or build those skills even. But what we would encourage companies to do is to think about what are the skills that relate to that, and how do we then widen the aperture to think about hiring for potential for those skills.
Brilliant. Yeah, and you also, I know I put it on this slide because I think you also had some great comments when we spoke earlier before the panel on this, because I mentioned that problem solving, design, process design, data management are all kind of core skills that shared service are looking for, which I know are things that you've been looking at when it comes to kind of using the skills of tomorrow to fill the roles of today. Is there some comments that you can share with us on that?
Yeah, no. So this is like the step 2, so to speak, of the skill adjacency piece that we just kind of talked about for oil and gas. But this is, again, something we help clients with, our customers with, every single day. Is there's skills make up a role, right? So as you can see on the screen, if you look at something like a systems analyst, it's a role that is it's fairly general, right? There's lots of systems analysts out there, and I don't think anybody on the line would be surprised to hear that that role is not something that people are fighting tooth and nail to bring into their organizations right now. So if I find myself as a systems analyst, or Sally, if you're running a company and you've got a lot of systems analysts, you might be looking to migrate those people into roles that are more of use to the company. So if we use the adjacent skill methodology, we can not only track that to, well, project management might lead me to this other skill, but it could lead me to a new role. So when we did do this work with customers, we see things like this all the time, that actually your systems analyst, because they know XML and HTML and disaster recovery and SQL, there's a huge skills overlap with a cloud engineer, which we know is something that you are competing tooth and nail for. It is something that is rising in the market. So we can help transition individuals over into roles or things that would be more beneficial for them, but also more beneficial for the company. And in fact, there's an example that I was just, it was last week, was talking about this, that one of our customers, they were going through a transformation, and they realized they needed a lot more digital talent, probably not new to anybody on this line, but they needed more data scientists. And that is a really hard position to go out and hire for. It's very competitive. When we did this exercise with them, we said, okay, well, what flavor of data scientists do you need? What does that look like for you? What are the skills required? they realized that they have a lot of digital signal processing engineers who they have a surplus of. They realized that the overlap between those two roles was pretty massive. So they've begun to transition a lot of their digital signal processing engineers, easy for me to say, over to be data scientists. And that impacted, I was talking before about build, buy, borrow, being more strategic there and using skills as the lens in which to do that. It was a perfect example of them realizing that they had the skills they needed, just people were in the wrong roles, the wrong places. Wrong is a stretch, but they weren't in the ideal places of the organization to fit the new transformation they were thinking about. So this is what we help customers with all the time, is to try to figure out how the skills that they might already have in their organization translate to the roles or the skills they really need.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's such a kind of different way of looking at it. So it's really cool to see. Guys, I'm going to put on a second poll up here while we kind of, before we go to our next question. I want to know kind of how are you currently tracking skills within your organization? Is it regular skills assessments, employee self-assessments, managerial evaluations, data from project or task performance, or utilization of HR software tools? Or if there's something else, then please do pop it into the chat and we can have a look at this. So while we kind of leave that up, Connor, we've had a great question come through from Janelle. And Janelle's saying, yes, we need to tap adjacent skills, but we need to account for the learning curve too. Depending on the skill level, it may take years to build the required skills and add that to the training costs. Is that something that you've experienced? Is there any advice you have on maybe speeding that curve up?
The simple answer is, in our world, so if we think about that oil and gas example, right, there were three to four adjacent skills per each of the very in-demand skill on the left, like well testing had a bunch of them, right? The more skills you have, the less time, in theory, it should take to learn that new skill, right? So ideally, and if we think about this, one of the easiest examples that we like to use is like programming languages. If you know 3 or 4 of the adjacent programming languages for a programmer, ideally your time to learn is not quite as long. But there's a human element to this as well. Like it's not cut and dry. And I know this is where ethical AI comes into play, or having explainable AI come into play, where a human always has to be in the seat to be able to make some of these decisions. So where AI can surf and say, hey, this person has 3 or 4 of these skills, I think they could be a really good candidates to learn this new skill. You might be able to say like, yeah, but I know that new skill is really tricky, or the way we do it at this company is a little bit different than everywhere else. And that's where a person needs to be able to make some of those decisions. So there's definitely learning curve cost associated. We tend to think the more adjacent skills you have, the faster or easier or potentially better at that skill you'll be. But a person also needs to be able to make those decisions because there's an interpersonal element of all of this.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Alejandra's actually added a comment, that's very related to this. So I'll just take that as well before we move on. And Alejandra is saying that, when we talk about adjacent skills in our team, we usually wonder how to calculate the learning effort from one skill to another in terms of time. So do you have any approach for this issue? You might have just answered it, but if you've got anything else that you want to add, that would be great.
Yeah, so one of our customers is Activision Blizzard. So they're a video game company, and they had an issue that I'm sure is not unlike many other companies, which is that they love to hire from within their own industry, primarily for that issue, which is that we think the learning curve to learn the video game industry is really high. We like to bring people in who can be, butt in seat in the first 30 days and start providing value. We think the industry lens is a really important piece there. Not for us to argue with. We're like, sounds good. As we were helping them stand up Eightfold and kind of rethink their hiring practices, they hire video game designers all the time, as I'm sure everybody here can imagine. And they realized as we kind of worked through it with them, there are very specific skills that they needed routinely all the time. And that was, there's a particular programming language they use, and you had to know 3D mapping or 3D design. So those are the 2 things they were really, really needed, must-haves. And when they started to use Eightfold to help them understand adjacent skills and kind of widen that aperture, they were very pleasantly surprised at how many more people they started to bring in, because they realized, well, how actually important is it? How long would it take someone to learn the video game industry versus how long would it take us to go compete for talent that there aren't a lot of people who actually work in the video game industry, or now I have to go poach someone from one of my competitors. So is the time to bring someone in actually less if I bring someone in from outside the industry? And one of the, is really, I love this example because one of the people they hired came from like a retainer company, the Clear retainers, so far afield from video games, but they realized like they use the programming language that we need. And when we talk about 3D mapping a retainer to someone's mouth, you have to be pretty darn good at that. So they started to reduce their need on the video game industry because it allows them to supplement their, yes, we still prefer to have people come from within our industry, their adaptability, or rather their ability to learn our systems versus somebody else, great. But we can supplement that with people who, this person's going to be good, they just need a little bit of time to get up to speed. So I hope that serves to answer the question where it's not one or the other, but it's a way to supplement the hiring and take that into account when you think about, again, time to potentially get someone in the door or time for them to scale up. You can have a little bit of both.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's almost an extension of the conversation we've been having around diversity, equity, and inclusion. You know, if you have a diverse workforce, if you bring in different people that maybe you wouldn't have recruited before, the impact on the business can be enormous in terms of creative thinking, in terms of different perspectives, in terms of making sure that you're not just kind of having this siloed view, and making sure that you extend beyond different experiences is, you know, such a valuable way of recruiting and way of building your business to be future-proof and be innovative. Our owner always says, what is it? If you do what you've always done, you get what you've always got. So
Amen.
I think he's right in that sense. He'd like to know that I name checked him. Here we go. Let's just have a look at our answers before we kind of go on to our final question. So employee self-assessment, 37.5% is how they're tracking skills.
It's something that we see all the time. And it's either employees self-selecting, not even self-assessing, but self-selecting the skills that I think I have, which is helpful. But this is where AI is also very useful. So as I mentioned, we have this massive store of global data. And what we're able to do for hiring managers, for recruiters, for managers, is be able to point out and say, you know, Sally says she has this specific skill, but based on the thousands of people who have resumes or backgrounds or skills like Sally has today, it's very strange that she says she has this skill, that she knows that she's a plumber on the side. Not saying she's not, but it's kind of weird. We've never really seen that before. So when you're interviewing Sally, you might want to ask her about that and maybe poke a little bit. So AI can help to point that out, but one of the things we also ask our customers to do is have a two-way assessment. Have a manager assess their own employees on you say you're either A, you have this skill, and then B, that you think you're really good at it. Maybe that's the case. I hope that's the case. But to have another data point of the manager saying, actually, like that's not what this skill means at this company, just a total misunderstanding of the definition, or you might think you're world class, I think you're very good. So self-assessments are helpful, but we can't rely on that entirely, but it's a good place to start for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take a look at, we did that one. There we go. Let's move on to the correct slide. So, we talked about how one of the key challenges within shared service, but within many, many different industries, is that digital talent is incredibly hard to come by. How can resource management assist in bridging the gap when there's such a scarcity of people in the market?
So for anybody who's read this slide at all as it was up, you can tell this is not about digital talent, but it is about another industry that has historically had a very difficult time hiring for a specific position. So before we get into what's on the screen, a little bit of background here. So we work with the Josh Bersin Company, and they use our data set, as I've talked about a few different times, to do research, essentially, as a proxy for, well, this is a pretty good indicator of the global talent market. So they use it to do some research like this one. This is their Pacesetters report, or a selection from their Pacesetters report, where they look at companies who are performing more or less head and shoulders, or the top performers in their industry and their sector. And the Josh Bersin Company was trying to figure out, well, what is it that they do talent-wise that is so different? Are there things they're doing that sets them apart from the crowd that we can identify? So they started to look at healthcare. And one of the first things they noticed was that actually the top performers in this industry are hiring fewer nurses than their competitors. Now, my mom was a nurse, so I'm sure many people here have heard this for a long time, that there just aren't enough nurses. So it's a very competitive role to hire for. If you had asked me before I saw this, are the top performers hiring more or fewer nurses than their competitors in this space, I would have, without even blinking, said they must be hiring more. They must be creating a culture where nurses thrive. They must be paying above market value. They must be reducing their hours, something, so they can bring in more nurses. But what they found is they're actually hiring for more of what's in the blue, the transformation, the technology roles, because what they decided to do is look at what skills they need a nurse to actually utilize. Well, they're healthcare professionals. They should be spending time with patients. They should be providing care. They shouldn't be doing data entry. They shouldn't be doing filing. They shouldn't be doing some of these manual things that take them away from patients. So these companies decided to create systems and processes and apps and whatever that looks like to take more of the load away from the healthcare professionals who have the skills that are very difficult to come by in the market, and instead create more sustainable processes so that they can spend their time doing what they should be doing all along. So I think this is a good proxy for anyone who's thinking about going after a particular skill set or role that is very hard to come by in the industry. It's not just about hiring someone for potential, which, as you can tell, we're very passionate about, but it is also about, how do I think about skills inventory? Back to the first thing we mentioned. If there's particular inventory that's really valuable, that is hard to come by, that you're using all the time, how do we make sure we're using that in the most efficient and effective ways possible? And maybe there are things we can do elsewhere in the organization that allow us to get the most value out of that skill set. So another example I love, because it was one that was really surprising to see to me, that actually there are fewer nurses at the best companies in the sector because they figured out how to make nurses more effective.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I never thought about like doing it that way before, and it makes a lot of sense when it comes to like the shared service industry, when we're all looking for that scarce talent, and often people complaining about how they don't get the time to spend on what they're A, really interested in their job, and B, really good at, and C, hired for. Yeah, that's super interesting. And I actually had one additional question related to that, because within shared services, improving time to staff and ultimately employee productivity has always been an absolute must. So from your perspective, how can resource management help here?
So when it comes to time to staff, I think one of the people that we have not yet talked about is the actual resource manager themselves. And I think the phrase that at least I end up using a lot is, it should be about staffing someone on a project should be about what they know, not necessarily who they know. And I feel like we're unintentionally a little bit taking a shot at resource managers, but they have a very difficult job. They have to keep dozens or potentially even triple digits of people somewhere in the Rolodex of their mind or on paper in a system, and be able to staff them in places where they know they'll be effective. I think the key word there is where they know. They have hopefully worked with this person before. They have staffed them on a project before. Ultimately, a resource manager wants to put the right person on the right job. So it's a very difficult job for them. And I too would gravitate towards, well, I've worked with Sally before. She's great. Even though she's not maybe the perfect fit for what the client's looking for, she knows how to deal with them. She'll be awesome. I'm going to staff her. Instead, what we are trying to do is to, again, we're not making decisions in lieu of any person. We're providing resource managers more insight into the entirety of the base that they have. So what that could look like is, you might never have staffed this person before. You might be a staffing firm in Brussels and this person works in Florida. So you've never met them in person. You might never have talked to them before. But I'm servicing that they have 8 of the 10 skills the client said they need. They have the hours available. They've worked in this industry before. It would be great to staff them, to get them off the bench and onto the project. So ideally, we're helping resource managers just with more visibility into their resources and guidance or insights to see things that maybe if they had a bit more time, the human eye would pick up, but instead AI is surfacing those to them right as they're staffing, so they can use more of the bench and get more people onto projects that make sense for them and for the client. So I think it was a 2-part question, but that's the answer, that one of the answers to being more efficient when it comes to staffing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we've reached kind of question time now. So if you guys in the audience have any questions that you'd like to put to us to Connor, ask about resource management or how you can improve that within your organization, then please do pop it in the attendee chat. One that kind of straight away came up was really around that DE and I. So
Mm.
equity, diversity, and inclusion is obviously an ongoing topic for shared services. How can resource management and or AI assist here? Because I know that a lot of people worry that AI means potential biases within HR.
Yeah. Um, so I know this is a silly thing to ask. Everybody raise your hand in your head, considering I can't see you, but raise your hand if you're doing the job that was outlined in the job description in what like where you applied for, what your current job is. I would guess I'm doing about 50% of what's in that job description initially. And I think that's actually a pretty decent proportion. Um, Raise your hand if that job description, if you would still use that job description today to hire someone for that role. Or raise your hand if you haven't applied for a job because you looked at the requirements and said, oh, that's not me. I don't fit that. So I say all this not to be flippant, but because it's really hard to put together a really good job description for someone. Because if I think about the job description that I put together, as I mentioned, there's an unconscious, even if I'm trying not to, there's an unconscious bias of I've done it this way, therefore I think the person that I'm hiring should also do it this way. And when we talked way back at the beginning about starting with talent and applying talent to as many places across the organization as they would be beneficial, this is where, again, AI can be helpful. I mentioned the example of a resource manager who's getting brought someone in Florida they never met before. Same thing is true of hiring. Even though I put together this job description and job requirements, if AI can help me find people who I might not have considered before because they have the potential to build into this role, or if I'm looking for a job and it doesn't say product marketing on it, I might not consider it because that's what I do. But if AI is telling me, actually, you'd be a great fit for a solutions engineer at this company or marketing operations, whatever that looks like, helps me to unblock myself, you get a chance to widen the aperture. So yes, DE&I is definitely a concern. I would encourage anybody out there who's looking for any kind of artificial intelligence tool to see if their vendor has done any kind of an ethical audit to make sure that their AI is not unnecessarily including bias, to make sure that it's well created. But again, a person always needs to be in the loop. AI should not be making decisions just yet. I don't know if anybody has dabbled with ChatGPT over the last year, but they started rolling out some features to LinkedIn. And I looked at what they said my summary would be on LinkedIn. Because my profile is private, even in LinkedIn, it doesn't have access to. So it just made something up. It had nothing. It had my name. The name was right, but had nothing to do with me. So point is, there always needs to be a person in the loop. But AI can ultimately help reduce some of those biases or even open our eyes to more people who we might not have considered before because they weren't who we thought we might be looking for that job or project.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. Because I think it's such a mistake to think we don't have biases.
Of course we do.
That we totally do, and AI can help with providing a different perspective that we can take and look further at. So Kim has made a great comment on when we talked about how you get employees to select or how you do your skills assessment. And she says employee self-selection is probably the place to start, is it not? Where would you start when you're looking at your skills inventory for employees?
So one of the things that we have the luxury of being able to do for our customers is I keep coming back to the data set that we have because it's really important. It's not only what we train our AI on, which is also really important, is that we have a large enough data set that we can reduce the bias, or we have been assessed as having reduced the bias in our own AI. But because of that, we can go to a customer and say, these are actually skills that we think are applicable to your organization based on employees like Connor, who we've seen, because we've seen hundreds, if not thousands of people who've been in product marketing and have progressed to different places in their career. We have those trajectories in our data set. We have a pretty good idea of the skills that he probably has. He worked at this company before. Generally, the people who did product marketing that company have this skill. So we can make some assessments about what he has. So we can get you started or up to speed there. One of the things we've also seen our customers do that helps them get off the ground, so to speak, is they've worked with like assessment vendors to have their employees go through various skill assessments. Like one of them was Korn Ferry. So that was a a more manual skills effort for employees, but allowed them to not only get a sense for what skills their employees have and be that validated to some degree by a third party, but then even how good are you at the skills you've got? So that's a yearly thing that they go through, and we can put that data into our system to help with matching for roles or opportunities or projects, and then even to help them figure out what their next skills might be based on how good they are at a particular thing or if they have that skill. So lots of different ways to answer that, but AI that can definitely help you get started. It doesn't have to be a manual in an Excel sheet, making sure I've written all the 31 skills that Connor has. It can get you started, and then employee assessments, manager assessments, all the other tools organizations already use can help feed that and get you closer and closer to fully accurate.
Excellent. And I think we've got time for one more question, and then we'll end. But the question is around getting the buy-in from your leadership for the investment in resource management, but specifically AI to use. What would your advice be here?
What we try to help our customers do is connect it as much to value as we can. And oftentimes it's, well, what is your organization trying to do right now? Like one of our customers, they were thinking about opening up, they're an entertainment company, and they were thinking about opening up a graphic design studio and opening up a few of them. So it's a big business priority for them. And initially they had a few locations in mind. And what we helped them do, even in the deal cycle, was we said, well, based on the skills that you're looking for, the roles you're looking for, let's see if it makes sense, based on our data, to open up roles or open up offices in those regions. And it turned out that the regions they were looking at, while maybe the cost structure was there or they had existing infrastructure there, the reasons they were opening the offices for that talent, it wasn't there. The talent just, you'd have to import it, which is very expensive. So anyways, point is, we try to figure out, or help our customers make the business case to leadership and ultimately help them understand that AI is a tool. It is not here to introduce bias. It is not here to take jobs. It is here to be a tool that people can use to be more efficient, to connect dots that is really hard for the human eye to see, and ultimately how we connect that to value, to what a company is really focused on or what they want to do. So creating business cases and having them getting that stamp of approval from executives is no easy feat, but that is how we try to help our customers do it when they're looking to expand or take this to new heights.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I could talk to you all day about this topic, but sadly that's all we've got time for. I put a last poll up, guys, if you do want more information on how you can embrace AI in resource management. We've got a quick poll up there. Has Connor convinced you? Are you excited and optimistic? Are you resistant? Are you skeptical? Please, do answer our poll, and we'll see what our audience say. This session, we've recorded it. It's probably available in about half an hour. It takes to process. So, if you want to re-listen, if you want to share with your colleagues, then it will be available for you. And of course, there are those resources on the right-hand side with more information on resource management, on AI, and on Eightfold. So please do download those. We will be back in the new year, myself and Connor, with the next in our series of webinars. So please do look out for that on the SSON website. Thank you once again to Connor for taking part, and thank you to everyone that attended.